Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we have a very special guest. I'm very grateful that he is with us today. Yusha Evans, Jazakallah khair for taking the time out to sit with us today.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Habibi. It's my pleasure. Alhamdulillah.
So today I was hoping that we could talk specifically about Da'wah. Just to give some of the viewers a background about you. You embraced Islam in 1998. You come from South Carolina. And I guess ever since you became Muslim, you've been involved in Da'wah. So you have over, I'd say, 20 years of Da'wah experience. And I really wanted to take this opportunity for myself and the viewers to benefit from some of your experiences, some of your advice and wisdom in that regard. So with that said, I figured I'd just pass it to you to get the ball rolling if there's anything in particular that you feel we should begin with.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. As entering into Islam, as soon as I found out that there was something called Da'wah, because that was what I was involved in Christianity anyway, was proselytizing, missionary work. As soon as I found out that there was, a similar field with the Islamic religion, I wanted to be involved in it. Not only because that's kind of, my background anyway, but simply because I grew up across the street from a masjid and had passed by it so many times and never ever heard anything about Islam until I, took it upon myself to go in there. And for anyone who's seen my reverse story knows that didn't go quite well in the beginning. So I wanted to make sure that, Americans had access to Islam in the simplest English language that I could find. So that was my entire intent in getting involved in Da'wah in the first place. Just I felt the need and the responsibility.
Yeah, mashallah. So let's see. So this was like 1998 in South Carolina in the Bible Belt. So what were the first steps you took back then? Because this was before 9/11. This was, I think the country was much more religious back then, especially, the state that you grew up in. So what was it like, I guess, taking those steps in that direction towards Dawa in the beginning?
Well, initially in South Carolina, I had nothing. When I first had accepted Islam, there was no classes going on in the masjid. There was nobody to teach me, tawheed. There was nobody to teach me aqidah. It was just basically, what happens most places, that you take shahada, everybody gives you a hug, and then we'll see you next Friday. That's just I was kind of left on my own. And in that situation, had I remained like that, wallahu alam, what would have become of me, how long I would have stayed a Muslim, because I was the only white Muslim. That was it. I was the only, white Muslim, period, at that time. There was a couple of African American revert brothers. Alhamdulillah, one of them got me in touch with a brother named Mutahir Sabri, who was the assistant to Imam Said Adli. For those of you who know Sheikh Muhammad Said Adli from South Carolina, mashallah, he's a jim for us here in the West, and he's well known in the South. He's been Imam in Columbia, South Carolina for 30-something plus years now. I think he has like 42 children or something like that as well. He's, mashallah, he's very good. And he was the person who put me on the path of aqidah, making sure that, you stick with the understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah as was understood by the companions and the Salaf. I mean, that was his thing. Stay away from this, stay away from that, because when you're a new Muslim, you have Shia sending you information, because at that time you just had to go on the internet, which was like Windows 98, I think, at the time, and you had to just try to request free information. And when you do that, you're getting stuff from the Shia, you're getting stuff from the Sufis, you don't know, and as a new Muslim, you don't know what's what. So I'm very grateful that I met someone like Sheikh Muhammad Said Adli, who himself is, a big supporter of the Da'wah, and he put me on the straight path of gaining knowledge correctly. And he ended up, telling me to leave South Carolina. He was like, dude, in Greenville, you're not going to get anything. So I ended up moving out of South Carolina not long after accepting Islam.
That's so important that a new Muslim has somebody like you described in their life, because it's such an impressionable time for such people. And you hear stories about the difference it can make when they have the right person in their life to guide them towards the right direction, inshallah, versus the opposite. So alhamdulillah for that. And
Yeah, the very first book I was given as a new Muslim was a book from Sufis. It was, it was a straight up, not anything upon the Sunnah. And when Sheikh Hadley saw me with it, he just threw it in the trash. He was like, "Nope, stay away from this." And he giving me the right stuff and putting me in classes to learn the Deen, and that's so important because, like I said, without that, who knows where I'd be.
yeah. So how did you go from that situation to then, obviously this is going to lead up to you being a nationally known figure, even internationally known to an extent figure. So, I mean, how did that happen? What were some of the steps that led you in that direction?
I've said this in quite a few interviews about this subject, is that was never my intention. And if it is someone's intention, their intention is completely wrong. My goal was to give da'wah. What happened was I ended up moving to Florida because my dad had moved to Florida at the time. So I ended up moving to Florida and getting a job a roundabout way. I've told that story about how I got fired on Jummah and get a job with a very good Palestinian Imam the next day. No, excuse me, the same day. I met him. He started me on another path of knowledge. He was involved in da'wah. And then it just so happened that when I was in Florida at the time, there was a brother. He's well known to old school figures in the da'wah. His name was Sheikh Muhammad Zakiuddin Sharfi. He's well known to very old school guys in the da'wah. He used to travel the country. He's from Mount Holly, New Jersey, and he used to travel the country old school giving da'wah. He would go to a city. Back then there was no internet, there was no smartphones, there was no apps, there was no social media. So he would go to a phone booth and get a payphone and look for Muslims' names, and he would call them and find out where the masjid was, and then he would go to the masjid, spend some time with the brothers there, try to encourage people to go out and give da'wah properly. I'm not talking about like tabligh Jama'at. No, his goal was you need to get out and give da'wah to the non-Muslims to change the condition of this country, and he would travel the country doing that. And he came to our city, and after spending a few days with me, I ended up becoming his tour guide for the rest of Florida, because I had been working for YSlam back then, or working with YSlam back in their earliest of days, trying to help set up YSlam chapters in the Florida area. So I traveled around Florida with him, and at the end of that trip, he just basically said, "Hey, do you want to do this full time? I'll pay you to travel with me. You can move to New Jersey. I'll teach you the da'wah firsthand." And so I ended up living with him. He was monumental in the early days of Siraj wa Hajj getting started in da'wah. He was very instrumental in the early days of Yusuf Estes getting involved in da'wah. So that's how I got started. And then I moved to College Park once he actually got evicted from the country in around 2004, because he was talking about end times. And that was a very, very strange time to be talking about end time scenarios. And he was correlating, hadith of the end times about what was going on with like the Iraq war and things of that time. So he ended up getting evicted from the country. And when he did, I moved to the Falls Church area. That was kind of like a place of knowledge, because I had already been there so many times. I was going back and forth to Virginia back in the early 2000s, and names that not be mentioned, were very well known in that area, giving durus, and I went there. And after that, I said, I'm just going to move here. I wanted to enroll in the Mahad, then they shut it down. So I got a job at Dar es Salaam, which is in College Park, Maryland. And my job was to be a fundraiser. I was kind of like the head face of fundraising. So in order to fundraise, you have to go to masjids, and you can't just walk in there and say, "Hey, give me your money." You have to do a little short talk. You gotta warm them up. We have to be coaxed and begged and pleaded with. So apparently I had a gift for talking for some reason, which is very odd to me because I've always been a very introverted individual. But that started spreading around, and then finally someone who was at one of the masjids was actually the head of the MSA at George Mason University. And they asked me to come and do a talk about my story, and they were the ones that titled it "How the Bible Led Me." We agreed to say "How the Bible Led Me to Islam." And I gave that talk, and that talk was put on YouTube back when you could only put 10-minute clips on YouTube. So they ended up having to put like part 1 through 6 on YouTube, and that took off because it was in this was like the infancy of YouTube. That took off. Brother Eddie from the Dean Show saw it, invited me out to be one of his very first guests for the English side of the Dean Show, because before that he was only doing videos in Bosnian. It was myself and Muhammad Said Adli who were the very first 2 English speakers on the Dean Show. Because before that, I was giving Dawa on MySpace. That was it. That's all that was out there. And then, the ball just started rolling from there. People saw those videos, would get in touch with me, ask me if I would come to their city and do this. And then word traveled about that one. And then that one got put on the internet. So it wasn't ever an intention. I never once, Allah is my witness, I never wanted, I'm not a person who likes to be a public spectacle. I don't like attention. I don't, it's just not my base nature. But it happens, by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for whatever reason. It's a gift and a curse. It happened, but I never had an intent to become some well-known, famous speaker. And I plan on mentioning something of that when we kind of discuss what is the difference between like the late 90s, early 2000s Dawah to now. We'll talk about that, inshallah.
Yeah, so I don't want to spend too much time on your background, because I think a lot of this is already available in other videos. But just, I guess, real briefly, so that we can sort of move on to more specific stories and issues pertaining to Dawah. From that point up until today, what have you sort of been involved with, and what's been going on with you since then, I guess?
I've been involved in so many projects from then to now. I've seen a lot of projects come and go. I've seen, the advancement of a lot of things. I at first I was traveling just with the United States. Most of it was doing, talks. The number one thing I was doing in the beginning was everybody wanted me to tell my story about how I came to Islam. So I was giving my story, and then I would spend a weekend with the brothers and sisters there talking about Dawah itself. Why, more or less why the need is there. Why should you get involved in Dawah? I spent probably the first, 3-4 years of my public traveling trying to explain to Muslims why Dawah is an obligation, and trying to get them to understand the whole concept around Dawah that I had learned from my very first teacher. Then I started traveling internationally. I got to see the foundation of things like IERA. I remember when IERA first evolved. I was there from the very beginning when they first started, and spending some time with those brothers. I was the beginning of many Islamic television stations. I don't want to go on and on, but I've traveled the globe for probably the past 12 years, but with only one goal. Number one, or two goals. Number one, to wake up Muslims to the importance of Dawah, that it is the only thing that is really going to save us at the end of the day. And number two, trying to wake Muslims up to the importance of their own deen, putting Islam and Tawheed above everything else. So that's been my main goal, and it's kept me on the road for a long time, except for the past 4 months. The past 4 months, I have been in one place, and it is very different. This is the first time in 13 years I've ever been in the same place for 4 months.
SubhanAllah. Well, talking about the importance of giving Dawah and trying to explain that to people, that's something that really frustrated me when I first became Muslim, is that a certain group, they go and give Dawah. We were only giving Dawah to other Muslims. And even them, they were one of the only groups even doing that. So, you obviously seeing the importance of giving Dawah to non-Muslims and also traveling and, interacting with different communities. Why do you think that is something that the Muslims aren't really taking on as a project as we should? Why aren't we showing the priority that we should as Muslims with the truth, living amongst non-Muslims? Why aren't we more engaged in conveying the truth?
Well, I think it's a multifaceted problem. Number one, we don't understand the obligation. And even when you do understand the obligation, we have Muslims who are shirking their major priorities in the first place. We have Muslims who are far away from Tawheed, period. We have Muslims who are far away from Salah. So it's, explaining Da'wah is kind of like, there's many other things that are on the list, but, Da'wah is the key to all of it. Da'wah is the key to, and I tried to explain this because I as well as an early Muslim sat with some of the brothers that go out and give Da'wah just to Muslims, because these are the only guys I saw doing anything. you know. So sit with them and spend, but you know, spending enough time with them made me realize there's something really strange going on here, you know. And then I ended up being the one giving da'wah to them, you know, telling them, hey, this is not the way we need to be doing this. You know, so that's not there. We don't understand the importance. We don't understand the weight, nor do we understand the reward that is involved in this mission. You know, you got people who are chasing all kinds of good deeds without realizing that being involved in da'wah is like one of the fast tracks to gaining a large amount of good deeds. And as well as we don't see how it is going to benefit the world. We have not been able to connect the dots. You know, we know a lot of things from the seerah. You know, your average Muslim knows many things from the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but they're like dots on a board that are not connected. You know, I mean, if you don't do a good connect the dot puzzle, you won't know what the picture is. So we have a lot of dots, but they're not connected, and they're not connected without realizing that yes, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam changed the world. It was through da'wah. Yes, he brought so many amazing companions, you know, into Islam through the da'wah. Everything that happened in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that became a means of khair for the ummah and for the world was because of his da'wah, was because of his understanding of the purpose of sharing the message of Tawheed with the world. We don't really realize that part of the reason we as Muslims are suffering dhullah everywhere, humiliation left, right, and center, is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not pleased with us. You know, we're not number one doing what we should be doing ourselves. But even if we have some lacks in our own lives, we can fill in a lot of those gaps with our sincere desire, intent, and effort to spread the message of Tawheed far and wide, because it brings about the pleasure of Allah Jalla wa Ala. As Allah said, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا. There's no better people on the planet than the people who are calling to Allah. So if we saw this happening on a larger scale and we're fulfilling the obligation of it being fard kifaya in its general sense, then, you know, we would see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala moving things more in a position to give us the strength and honor that we're looking for, but we're just looking for it in the wrong places.
Jazakallah khair. Yeah, I wanted to moving forward, I wanted to ask you about how your approach to giving da'wah has changed over the years, because 20 years ago, and even when this video that was uploaded where you were talking about how the Bible led you to Islam, it seemed like during that time, America was a much more Christian country. I feel like over the past 10, 20 years, they've really moved away from that. So what have you noticed in that regard, and have you had to change your approach to giving da'wah due to the fact that people might not be as influenced by the Bible or their Christian roots?
Sure, 100% correct on the simple fact that in the early days of the da'wah, the message was more theological. You know, we were more on a theological da'wah, in that, you know, explaining to people, convincing them of the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as one, using the Bible as references, using this, you know, the other scriptures as reference, you know, really hitting people on a theological and spiritual level. But seeing now, you know, that the world is becoming, especially here in the West, much less theological, much less spiritual. You know, I've sort of, you know, drifted the da'wah over to how can we help the world in instance, what can Islam do for you? You know, not how Islam can help your heart and change your soul and put you in heaven, which is there, but how can Islam help you now? You know, how can Islam change the society that we live in? How can Islam help poverty? How can Islam tackle social ills like, you know, what we see going on with homelessness, with you know, sexual deviance, prostitution, LGBTQ? Islam has the answers for all of this. How can we as Muslims help plug that into the society? Not necessarily shoving da'wah down people's throat, accept Muslim or you're going to hell, you know, that old, you know, Pentecostal preaching, you know, turn or burn. That doesn't really go as far these days. You know, people are just like, we don't care. But how can we help what is going on right now? You know, how does Islam deal with racism that's going on in America right now? How does Islam deal with the economic disparity that we see in the West right now, where there's the haves and the have-nots? So I've been trying to do that on a more logical level but using, the religion of Islam as the catalyst for the change, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you about, the United States as a whole, as somebody who has traveled for a couple decades to many different communities from the East Coast to the West Coast, North and South. How have the communities changed over the years? And also, what are some of the differences and similarities between these different communities in these different parts of the country? Because America is so big, sometimes there are completely different vibes and cultures depending on what state you're in. So, what have you noticed in that regard over the years traveling in America?
Well, back in the early days, the communities were more diverse in the sense of their, what is the word I'm looking for, their school of thought leaning Islamically. You know what I mean? You would go to masjids where you see that, this is a South Asian Hanafi, very strict masjid, and you would go other places and you would see these are brothers who are part of the Salafi Dawa, which that had a totally different meaning back then than it does today. That meant something completely different than it means today. But what you see now, and I think it's somewhat unfortunate, is that communities now are distinguished by their political leanings, believe it or not. Communities are now becoming just like the rest of the West and the rest of America, divided between left and right politically. Political leanings, whatever your political leanings are, affect your religious leanings, if that makes sense. They've kind of gone hand in hand now. Liberalism has not only blended into, has not only taken over their politics as they make deciding factors within their outside life, but it's also become the scope by which they view the religion. They now are viewing the religion with a liberal scope, and everything has to be interpreted on that liberal scale. The same way with conservative communities, you'll find that they view Islam in a conservative way, and that then transforms into the way they view socioeconomic platforms as well. And that's become a strange dynamic to be involved in, is that we've become, rather than schools of thought which have a flavor that is permissible, to now left or right. Things have become very, very different now, especially when it comes to politics. Used to be talking about politics was just not really that thing. Now it's like an issue where it's a dividing line. You speak about politics, you're put into a frame, you're put into a box. This is it. This is what he believes. This must be his religious leanings. This must be his social leanings, etc.
Yeah, it's a shame how much the Muslims have been affected by this left-right political divide that America is facing right now. And we hear the same stories over and over again, year after year, about these board meetings. And let's say you have an imam who, he's not even really affected by the political leanings of America. But for example, he might think celebrating Thanksgiving something that we shouldn't do as a community. But then you have other board members who think, no, we should. So then before you know it, there's this split in the community, and they excommunicate the imam, and they have a restraining order. And it seems like we keep hearing these same stories over and over again, whether you're in America or even Canada, on the East Coast or the West Coast, about this sort of thing happening. Is that something you've also seen over the years with these masjid boards and all of the drama involved, or do you think maybe it's blown out of proportion?
I've seen it second and first hand. Meaning second hand is, I know plenty of imams who have been through it. I know imams who have actually been sued by the masjid that they hired them and praised them for so long. They end up getting sued by them, excommunicated and sent back to their country, and all this and that and the other. And I've also, worked with a number of masjids and have seen the behind the scenes, and seen how masjid politics, when it comes to boards, and I like to call it game of thobes, where it becomes this whole power struggle within inside the board and the imam is really just ends up being just a mouthpiece of the board, and he's kind of dictated to in that sense, which has always been a problem for me since way back when. Is that if your imam is not an imam, then your community is already on its way for troubles and problems. And I learned this from watching Safi Khan, the way he kind of constructed things back in College Park, Maryland, with Dar es Salaam and things of that nature, where it's an imam and a shura, and that's the way they roll with it. But yes, there's been a travesty on imams for as long as I've been a Muslim.
Do you have any sort of ideas about how we can overcome this? Because just recently and just over and over, there are these people, these brothers, imams, principles of Islamic schools, they do so much good, and they start off with, you know, a little Islamic school where nothing's seemingly going right, and then you fast forward 5-6 years, and now they have all these certifications, and the enrollment has skyrocketed. And the same with Imams. They started off with this little house. Now they have all this land and this big structure. And then the people who played that vital role of getting the ball rolling, and the community loves them and they did so much good. There's some sort of issue with the board of people who, subhanAllah, have no business really even interfering with what's going on, causing these people to leave, to get kicked out, and just really making things crumble. And it puts people in these very difficult positions where I don't want to leave the community. I don't want to quit my job because they care about the kids, the youth, the students. But at the same time, there is this abuse where it reaches a point where it's like you can't deal with it anymore. You know, I mean, and it just seems like it's the same story year after year, community after community. Do you have any idea, any suggestions about how to overcome this sort of thing?
You know, I don't have a magic pill for that, but for sure it goes back to how the formulation was set up. You know, a lot of it is we're taking the rules of it, like incorporation, and using and abusing them when it comes to masjid boards. We're running masajids like, you know, like a regular business or corporation. You know, and that's not the way it's supposed to be run. Yes, you need to set up a masjid, you know, with laws of incorporation, articles of incorporation, 501c3, all of that needs to be done. But, you know, all of the people who are trustees, board members are trustees at the end of the day. They don't own, and that's a lot of problem. I think it may be another generation before we see a lot of that change, because a lot of it is a mentality from other countries, you know, where board members feel like because they've given a lot of money, you know, or they put in a lot of time, or they put big donations, that by some weird thought process they own the building. And I've had to remind many boards that the moment you made this a masjid, a waqf for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you don't own it. It becomes property of Allah Jalla wa ala. You are a trustee now. You are someone who is entrusted to caretake the masjid. That is a huge responsibility, and it needs to be dealt with accordingly. And I've given the advice to so many communities. Even communities that are starting up and have reached out to me for Imam suggestions. Do you know anybody that would be a good fit for us? And I always advise them that if you're going to hire an Imam, he needs to be the Imam. His contract, everything, all of that needs to be laid out to where he is your Imam. When it comes to matters of religion, he needs to be the final say. You've hired him because you believe in his credentials. You believe he knows the Quran. You believe he knows the Sunnah. You believe he can lead your community in piety and righteousness. Give him that respect. When it comes to matters of religion, the Imam should have the ultimate say. His word should be an ultimate say, along with a shura of trusted individuals who can support him. When it comes to building maintenance and facilities, and yeah, board of trustees, you guys can run that show all you want. Keep the building functioning. But the problem is when the two become mixed in together, that, you know, doctors of medicine or architects or engineers who are board trustees then feel like they have the right to say in matters of religion, in matters of deen. And that becomes a huge problem, because you don't know the deen well enough to make these decisions. So if you're going to hire an Imam, let him be the Imam. If not, then don't have an Imam. Just run your own affairs the way they are, and, you know, let it go like that. But if you're going to bring an Imam in, let him be the Imam. You trust him, let him be the Imam.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. A lot of it is, okay, you're the Imam, I trust you to be the Imam. You're the principal, I trust you to be the principal. Everyone just sort of getting in where they fit in and trusting other people to do their jobs according to their expertise. So it's kind of, it seems like it's, I mean,
so if the Imam goes way out of whack and starts saying ridiculous, you know, I mean, this is why you have a shura, a council of brothers and sisters with knowledge who can, you know, check those kinds of things. But this is not a matter for a board member who runs a business to be deciding what the Imam can and cannot say from the minbar. This is a dhulm, this is an injustice, and you will answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about it. When it comes to those matters of religion, only opinions should come from people who have credentials and knowledge to give those opinions.
Absolutely. So I have some more questions here, but I wanted to pass it over to you. Is there anything specific any specific topic you wanted to discuss, or any stories or advice? I just wanted to throw it over to you, see if you had anything specific.
You know, when it comes to advice in regards to da'wah, my advice has always been, you know, to understand that this is a responsibility upon every single Muslim. Allah Jalla wa ala, and I heard this, and this was something that was, you know, said in a small gathering at the house of Sheikh Abdullah in Medina. You know, when I was asking him things about da'wah, and he explained, and you know, because this was back when I used to go to Medina during the summer. I used to go make Umrah. When the session would let out, I would go make Umrah, and I would just stay, you know, and I would just hang out, overstay my visa, not stay in the hotel. I would just sleep with brothers from the Jamia, sleep in the masjid. In Medina, I would sleep pretty much anywhere. It wasn't really bothered. And I would try to attend, you know, as much as I could, and thrive from as much of the ulama during the summer breaks as I could. But I used to always spend, you know, some time at Sheikh Abdullah's house. And I was trying to ask him, how do I explain to people the importance of da'wah? And he was saying that if Allah had given us no evidence about da'wah other than the evidence of ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wa ma'uzatul hasan, if that had been the only verse revealed about da'wah, it would be sufficient enough for us to know that it is a mandatory act. It is a mandatory act, and it is a fulfillment of our obligation to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And someone who knows of this and does not do it is extremely sinful. You know, so I've always tried to make Muslims understand that this is an obligation for you to share about Islam what you know. Share about Islam what you know with whomever you are given the ability to do so. If we had, let's just say, 25% of the ummah, 20%, 10% of the ummah came to this understanding and started to apply da'wah in their everyday lives, we might not even see some of the stuff that we're seeing today. Philistine might not be going through what it's going through today. Muslims might not be oppressed in the lands they are oppressed in today. The world could be a completely different place in one generation if we woke up to our obligation to share about Islam what we know. And that's all it is. Da'wah is so simple. This is something that frustrates me more than anything, is that everyone thinks you need to have a degree, you know, or you need to have gone to some, you know, Jamia somewhere, or you need to have sat, you know, with a sheikh for 5-6 years. And no. Da'wah is, as was told to me, sharing about Islam, what you know to be true, by the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and then don't talk about things you don't have knowledge of. Simple as that. Say what you know to be true from the Quran and the Sunnah, and don't talk about things you have no knowledge of. It's that easy. It's that easy. Speak up when you know you're backed by information from the Quran and the Sunnah, and when you don't think you are, just keep your mouth closed. It's not very difficult to be involved in. You could see someone in an elevator, spend 45 seconds with them and say, hey, do you know that you were created by one God to worship him and him alone for the entirety of your life? And based on that life, you will either go to heaven or hell. Hand them a card and say, here's some information about Islam. If you're interested, you can look it up. That's it. You have fulfilled an obligation under the book of Allah. You have followed the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. You've done a very noble act that gets you great reward, and it did not take a lot of effort. So, you know, I really hope that Muslims start coming around to this understanding of how important da'wah is, how simple it is, and get involved in any way that you can, in any means whatsoever, inshallah.
Do you have some other practical examples that people, let's say they're watching this and it hits their heart and they say, you know what, I should be giving da'wah. I do need to inform people about the truth, but they might not really feel comfortable or really know what direction to turn and how to go about that. Do you have some advice for such a person on how to just, you know, give some simple da'wah?
The first thing they need to do is start being aware of opportunities. You know, when it comes to da'wah, you have to look for opportunities, because if you're a person who thinks about da'wah, then you will start to see opportunities presented to you to share Islam in your own simple way. And it might not all of us are great orators. You know, there's just going to be some people that just, that's not their thing. They're not going to be the person on the Dawa stall in the city center, you know, preaching about Islam. That's just not for everybody. But everyone has a role to play when it comes involved in da'wah. Maybe your job, and some people's job might be just to support some other people's da'wah with their money. You know, that's what I tell some brothers. If Allah has given you nothing else other than money, use that to serve Him. You know, there's a lot of da'wah organizations out there that could use your funding. That might be your way. You might have 9 jobs. You might own 8 businesses. You have 0 time to be involved in the da'wah. You can get involved however you can, but there's always a way. There was a doctor who I spent a lot of time with in Florida. He is a nephrologist, which is a pediatrician that specializes in kidney diseases when it comes to children. And he used to see, you know, patients left, right, and center, and he would see parents, and he would, you know, give prescriptions for them and give, you know, advice to them. But he would always say that, you know, I'm giving you this prescription or this recommendation because this is what I find to be the physical symptoms and the remedy for them. But know that none of this can help you without the permission of the one who created you. So make sure before taking any of these advices or medications I give you, say, in the name of the one who created, please help this to heal me. And just that little simple, effective da'wah he did brought a number of people to Islam. And if not, it brought a number of people to find out more about Islam. And even if they didn't accept Islam, they had a better opinion of Islam and Muslims because of that simple interaction. So it's looking for those little ways. Maybe you're a graphic designer. Hey, I know every Muslim involved in da'wah, especially in the social media world today. We need graphic designers. I need flyers all the time. I need websites designed. Everything has a role. Everybody has a niche, a talent that they can be involved in when it comes to da'wah. That's one of the things I teach in the da'wah workshop that I've done all over the globe, is finding your niche, looking at what your talents are and seeing how can any of these talents I possess help the da'wah in some form or fashion, and then use that. That's it. We always need help for everything.
That's beautiful. I think if we could have like an encyclopedia of different occupations and strengths and
how they can help in the da'wah.
Exactly. Just like you said about that doctor, like if somebody could look up whatever occupation they are and have something like that where they could, you know, call people to Islam, that would be beautiful, inshallah. Because that's a incredible example that I never heard before. You know.
It's a part. I don't want to give too much away because that's going to become part of my dissertation. I'm working on my PhD with Sheikh Walid now. But yeah, inshallah, we're going to start working on something that can formulate even, you know, a database to where what kind of all the talents we could ever think of and how they can be used in the da'wah in some form or fashion, and have contributions added from other people of how they can use their talents. Because everybody has some talent. Everybody has some profession. Everybody went to school for something. And I guarantee you, if you have a talent, which everyone does, I can guarantee you there's a use for it in the da'wah.
MashaAllah. So I guess one of the last things I wanted to mention, which relates to before you had just talked about people even financially supporting the da'wah, I wanted to ask you about making money doing da'wah and the whole, you know, that whole field of getting a salary, getting paid, because, you know, of course there are extremes. There's the extreme of people letting the money, charging way too much to go speak somewhere, charging, you know, crazy fees for stuff that's unnecessary, and also people being influenced by their paychecks and where they're getting money from to water down the deen or push them in a certain direction. And then you have, I feel like, the other extreme where people, because they don't want to have to make any money doing da'wah, they don't give any da'wah. And even though they might have graduated from an Islamic university, spent 10 years studying their deen, they're the most knowledgeable person in their neighborhood, now they're working for FedEx, they're not giving any da'wah, they're not teaching anything. So it's like, you know, do you have any recommendations in terms of finding that balance or any experience that you can share with us?
Like you said, I've been around for a long time. I've been involved in what we call the da'wah scene. I don't even like to say that, but you know, for quite a long time now. I've seen what you saying, both sides of the scenario. You know, I've seen people who ask for, like, you know, pop star rates when they show up to certain things and fundraisers, and they have exuberance. And you know, I've seen people who don't want to ask for anything for their time, and they don't continue very long. They're not doing anything anymore. First, we have to deal with it. Is it permissible, you know, to take a salary for giving lectures and giving durus and traveling the world? Yes, 100% across the board. This is 100% permissible from all modern ulama who ask, and also the four fuqaha of the major schools of thought of Islam said that Islamic work should be paid for. 100%, all the way down to the muazzin of the masjid, all the imam, the caller to Islam. Whoever's working for the field of Islam should be paid to do such. And actually, if you go back in our history, du'at were some of the most honorable people and most respected fields and positions in the ummah. These people were entrusted with great service, and they were treated as such. So, but we also have a problem now with, I don't even want to say this, like a celebrity syndrome, to where the more popular a person is, the more they feel like, they should be able to charge for these things, and etc., so on and so forth. Everybody has to answer to this between themselves and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This goes back to the whole point of, why are you doing it? What is the intention behind your da'wah? Is it sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If so, then you'll be reasonable. And again, there's no, I'm not saying there should be some standard, because what one brother's living scenario might be different to another brother's living scenario. A brother let's take two people who are traveling the world, full time. They're traveling the world. And a lot of people don't understand that if you are traveling the world full time, you don't have a full-time job. There's no way. Nobody's giving you off every weekend, a week here, a week there. And I'll give some advice about that in just a moment. But let's say a brother who has a big family. He has a wife, 4 or 5 children. His needs when it comes to taking care of his family are quite different than the student of the Jamia who just graduated, who's still living, in a bachelor pad and doesn't have anybody to take care of. So, there should be some, because at the end of the day, you have to be able to sleep with this. Whatever you are doing, however you are earning your money, whatever you're charging for services that you give, you have to be able to sleep with yourself at the end of the day. So that comes back to taking some accountability between yourself and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I've always, there have been plenty of times where I've traveled places, and yes, I have charged an honorarium. I charge an honorarium because it's not for giving the talk. I mean, that's silly. The talks are for free. It's for my time. My time is valuable. If you want me to get on a plane and travel to your country and spend a week between traveling there back and forth and away from my family and other things that I can do, then yes, your time should be compensated. The talks, we do them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's for my time. But there's been times where you have to be reasonable, where people say, look, we can't afford to do this and that and the other. Okay, alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end of the day has already written my risk. I'm very flexible about that, but you have to understand that there has to be some reasoning behind it. And if someone wants to get involved in da'wah as their only source of income, choose another field. You're going to be miskin. Unless you become a celebrity, you're not going to make it. You are going to get very frustrated, and you're going to get very tired, because you will get abused. You will get Muslims who don't honor their word. You will get people who will follow that through on their contracts. You will get very frustrated. And my biggest advice, most people I've had brothers come to me and say, Yusha, I want to get involved in da'wah on a high level like what you've done. What is your suggestion to me? My suggestion to them is start a business. Become an entrepreneur, whether that business is a physical business that you start, or an online business, or a drop ship business. Start a business and let that business grow to where you're not needed to be there 9 to 5 every single day. Then you will have the free time to go out and do and travel the world and spend your time for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as well as that there's a backup fallout income that is going to take care of you and your family. This is a big problem that brothers have, unfortunately, Muslims in the West have. Muslims in Muslim countries are entrepreneurs. They start businesses. If a brother starts a bookshop and it's successful, a brother will go start another bookshop exactly like it right across the street, and they'll both work out, inshallah. But here, it's all about the rat race, the 9 to 5. How far can I get in the corporate world? How far can I get in this job? And you don't have any time. So that's one of my advices to brothers getting involved in da'wah. Sisters as well, start a business. Because number one, that is the most freeing form of income. The most freeing form of income is self-income. because you are your own boss. You answer to you. Nobody's going to tell you you can't go to Jummah. Nobody's going to tell you you can't grow your beard. Nobody's going to tell you you can't put on a hijab. No. And Muslims should support Muslim businesses, because if we had our own self-sufficiency like that, it would make it a lot easier for us.
Yeah, mashallah. I wanted to ask you about traveling so much. You said that just the past 4 months is just the first time you really have sort of settled down somewhere. That sounds like a nightmare.
It's a nightmare.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, but also before that, I wanted to point out that, you know, before you get into how that affects somebody and their family and their health and mental health, you know, people should respect that and understand why certain people might charge some money, you know? Like, it's like people, they act like you're their commodity. Like, oh, Yusha Evans, you need to come here and we shouldn't have to pay you anything. And it's like, they don't understand what you're going through as a human being and about your time and about your other responsibilities to your family. It's like, you're at least out there trying to give da'wah. There's so many people who would just, you know, they're not doing anything. So it's like there should be that balance where they understand your position, they're willing to compensate you reasonably, and, you know, appreciate what you're doing, even if you can't necessarily go somewhere. So I wanted maybe to let you expound upon you traveling for all those years.
Yeah, in the beginning, and again, you know, the advice I gave about business is always the model I've always had. I have not worked for anybody. Alhamdulillah, I have not I have not had to clock in and clock out with anybody since 2004. You know, I've been self-employed in some way or another, whether it be martial arts, and I've done a shoe business, I've done car stuff. I always have something on the side that I'm doing as an entrepreneur, because I don't want this to be my only source of income. I don't want to go to bed at night knowing that my only source of income is off the backs of Muslims who might have donated to a masjid or a Dawa organization who then paid an honorarium to me. It just doesn't sit right with me. It doesn't. It wouldn't, and it wouldn't sit right with me even if I traveled every day and became a rich person off of it. It wouldn't. I wouldn't be able to live with that properly. But in the beginning, you know, I used to just travel and hope that Muslims were going to take care of me. You know what I mean? That was how I started out back in the mid 2000s. Travel and, you know, take the invitation. Yeah, sure. Not ask for anything and hope that Muslims are going to take care of me. That didn't last very long. That lasted maybe a year or two, till I got abused enough to say, hey, hold on a second. You know, I got to kind of stick up for myself, you know, from Muslims flying me, you know, on a what should be a 3-hour flight ends up being like a 14-hour flight because the cheap flight flew around the country and then to Europe and back, and, you know, then being put in a hotel that was not even clean enough to pray in. You know what I mean? And sometimes I've had to kind of deal with that balance of trying to show organizations and inviters that there is a fine balance between being a diva and being an adult. You know, that look, if you book a hotel for a Muslim and you know that you wouldn't put your own family member in there, don't put that brother in there. If you go in there and look and the carpet's covered in who knows what, blood stains, this and that and the other, you've now left that brother to have to pray like that, you know, and be clean. And now he's gonna have to take whatever's in that hotel back to his house. There were times where I had to get completely undressed in the garage, like head to toe, because I didn't want to bring bed bugs in the house and things of that nature. So it you know, it came a point where I said, look, we need to be professional about this. And I tried to make my da'wah on a professional level. There's a contract, there's an agreement, all this is in place before we even get past things. And, you know, we make sure that everything is laid out for you. I'm trying to make it easy for the inviter, that this is what you do from A to Z, you know, and this will go very smooth and work out for everyone, because it's not easy. Anyone who I used to love travel, and I still do. I like seeing the world. I like seeing places. But when you do it on a consistent basis, it becomes torture. Even the Prophet ﷺ said that traveling was torture. It is a punishment to have to constantly be on the road, because I like going places, I like being places, but I don't like the process of having to get there. And that has gotten more and more difficult every single year, especially when you fly as a Muslim. Flying while Muslim, it becomes a big problem. Just to get to the UK, you know, it might be 14 hours from the time I leave my house and go to the airport and get S's all across my boarding pass and get harassed at the airport and get on a plane, get a delayed flight. And it is very tiring. And it got to the point to where Even though it's very odd to be in the same place for 4 months, I now realize how hard, the past 12 years has been, traveling so much, and what the toll that it takes on your body, the toll it takes on your family. It's a huge sacrifice that brothers that are traveling for a very consistent basis, they are sacrificing quite a bit. I have missed so much of my home. I've missed so much of my children growing up, and etc., so on and so forth. But again, the only reason I did it was because I felt a responsibility. Because if you don't feel a responsibility, you won't make it. You won't make it. You won't make through the abuse. You won't make it through the flights and the you would not be able to survive all that stuff. There's no glitz and glamour. It might be some glitz and glamour for the first 5, 6, 7 trips, or 5, 6, 7, 8 months, and then it wears very thin, very fast.
Yeah, so Jazakallah khair. With that said, I guess the last thing we can touch upon has to do with like probably social media, because as difficult as traveling has been for you, now it's like we have social media where we can do things like this and you don't have to travel, but you can still reach the world. But that also comes with its own problems. And right now, since there's this pandemic, nobody's really traveling anywhere. So things are moving much more onto social media, I think. So I guess, is there anything you want to say regarding social media?
Social media is a gift and a curse. I have a hate love relationship with it. It's not a love hate because they're not equal. It's a hate love relationship with social media. And I think I have a right to speak on this a little bit, because I'm giving away my age in the simple fact that, I was already involved in the Dawa at the advent of social media. I had a Facebook when Facebook was only for college students, when you had to have a .edu email in order to be a part of Facebook. I was on Dawa in MySpace. I used to record videos sitting in my living room. I mean, I probably looked like I was in some cave in Afghanistan back then, but I used to record videos in my living room and upload them to MySpace. I remember when YouTube first came out, I along with a couple of the brothers were some of the very first people to ever put anything. And that's not to brag, it's just saying why I can speak to this. I've seen the evolution. I've seen it all evolve. I remember when Instagram came about. I remember when I don't really do the Snapchat. I'm not TikTok. I can't even get on those levels. But the difference, there's a huge, when it comes to da'wah, let's say from the 90s till today, there becomes a dividing line in like 2007, and like around 2007, the advent of the iPhone and things of that nature and social media. Because pre that, there was no clout to be chased. There was no followers to be gained. There was no views to be had. You know what I mean? There was no ads to monetize. There was nothing. You had to be purely involved in the da'wah for the means of loving the da'wah, because there was nothing else to be had. There was no online clout to chase. And then as soon as social media started becoming, a big thing, especially when YouTube went to monetization, when social media went to a way to make income based on followers, and a way to self-aggrandize oneself, narcissism really came to the forefront in almost all levels of religiosity and religious fields. So there's a huge test when it comes to social media, because you have to ask yourself, why are you doing it? What is the purpose of your social media? You have plenty of people out there with religious pages who are only in it for the followers. They're only in it for the views. They're only in it for the ads that they can get. They're only in it for the sponsors that they can get to monetize their page. They're only in it for the ability to monetize their videos, and to be able to trigger you and clickbait you into watching, and all the gimmicks that are out there. So it's totally changed the purity of the da'wah in some senses, and it has also changed our versions of reality. Before social media, reality, you knew about people what you knew about people, based on physical interactions that you had with them, which was even though that's not, a true character people show you what they want, but it was a more valid representation of human interaction. Now, you don't know what's real. You have no idea what's true and what's false, and all social media is a facade at some point. I've said it so many times. My social media is a facade, and I admit that, though, because I'm only going to show you on social media, the things that I feel are beneficial to you. I'm only going to post good things. I'm not going to tell you about my sins and my low times and my struggles. I opened up a bit of that on my podcast, but I'm not going to, show you the raw, unscripted, unfiltered version of myself on social media. I'm going to pick and choose to portray an image that is based on the da'wah. That's everything with social media. But now social media has become a litmus test by which we judge individuals. And it's like, how did that ever become reality? Whoever said that this is a reality? And the openness that we have to backbite one another, the openness we have to slander one another, the openness we have for all of these ills that we have been warned about so grievously in the Quran, have really truly affected not only the da'wah, but it's infected the sincerity of, I think, an entire generation of Muslims, especially Muslims aged, like 15 to 35. It's really changed the way they view the world.
Yeah, the tough thing is, mashallah, you can remember a time before social media, like the good old days, but a lot of us, we're growing up now. That's all that they know,
I remember a time before cell phones.
Yeah.
I remember a time when you had to page people, you had to beat people and wait at payphones, and to have human interaction took some effort.
Yeah, unfortunately, it seems like, of course, only Allah knows the future, but it seems like people are only going to be more involved in social media as we move forward. So it's like, how do we, what do we do about that? How do we?
If you want my honest opinion, there's no fix. There's no fix.
No.
It's going to be one of those things where only the strong survive the age of social media. There's no fix for it. This is all part of, and I speak about this so often because it frightens, the hell out of me, to be frank with you, is that this is all emerging towards, times of Dajjal and things of that nature, age of deception, age of tracking, age, all of this data mining, etc., so on and so forth. It's not going to get any better. The very strong will survive social media. And I tell most people that, look, if social media is a fitna for you, delete it, erase it, stay off of it. I would love if I could have a day where I could just completely go off social media, it would be like, I would have a celebration for that day, because it is one of those things that can even affect the strongest of people. When you start going on social media and your followers start growing and you start pushing, and next thing you know, you start seeing people liking, and you start feeling like, oh, maybe you've done something good. Your sincerity goes out the door. Or if you're not thick-skinned, don't be on social media, because everybody has an opinion. And one of the saddest things that I think I've seen over the past 10 years of social media is that Muslims have made themselves look like the stereotype that we are: ignorant, no sense, no common sense whatsoever on any level, at any stage. The way we behave on social media, I just watch, and I'm just like, if I was not a Muslim and was not a Muslim who would travel around the globe, I would think that we as a community are some of the most backward, ignorant, cannot read a sentence, will not read a caption people on the face of this earth. We make ourselves look extremely ignorant. So, be careful of what you post on social media. Be careful of what you comment on social media. The best advice for social media is the advice of the Prophet ﷺ. Either speak good or remain silent. Simple as that. Either say something that is beneficial or keep quiet. Simple.
May Allah protect us and guide us. So I guess just to wrap it up, you were doing a podcast for a while, but I think you haven't recently really been posting episodes. Do you have anything like that going on? Because I really enjoyed your podcast. And is there anything that you're doing right now in terms of putting out content?
I took a hiatus for a couple of reasons on the podcast. Number one, when I ended the podcast last time, it was before last Ramadan. I had made a move to Texas, and ended up, it was a very busy time. I ended up coming back to Minnesota. And since moving back to Minnesota, I've been very heavily involved in trying to finish my dissertation. And also, number two is that I did not expect, to be honest with you, I didn't expect some of the the response to some of the videos that I did, especially, you know, like when it came to my childhood trauma and stuff like that, like the overwhelming overflow, it, I had to take a step back for a minute and kind of, you know, reevaluate how much I wanted to let go and come up with a scripted way of I'm going to do the podcast. But, and I don't want to give any promises that I don't keep, but my sincerest intention is very, very soon to start the podcast back up on a regular scheduled basis. But also for the past year, I have been on the go pretty much 3 out of 4 weekends, every single weekend for going on 13 months now. That is hard to do, as well as, you know, make sure you do a good podcast every week. So I'm not going to start it again until I have done like 4 or 5 episodes and have those in the bank, and then we're going to start bringing it out again, inshallah ta'ala. But yes, I'm going to bring it back because it was somewhat therapy for me as well, because it was one of those areas where this is not it is religious. Like I would bring the deen into it, but it was more of just, you know, unscripted, uncuffed, you know, just talking about issues that I felt were of importance. And I have a lot of material that I've saved up now, especially over the past 13 months. There's a lot of stuff that's happened. There's a lot of stuff that can be brought forward, inshallah.
Inshallah, mashallah. So I'll post links in the description to everything that you have going on. And I really appreciate you taking the time out. May Allah bless you and grant you the best of both worlds. And hopefully, you know, we can talk again sometime soon, inshallah.
Inshallah, we'll catch up in person sometime.
Inshallah.
If you ever come to Minnesota, you let us know. You'll be my guest, inshallah.
Inshallah. Yeah, if the pandemic, you know, allows. SubhanAllah. Have you been traveling since the pandemic? Have you been going anywhere?
Nope. I've not gone anywhere since March 1st.
Okay. Alhamdulillah.
Literally, this is the first time I've ever been in one place this long. It's odd, but it's gratifying as well. It's weird. I now realize how much I was missing out on life.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Yeah, there's the upside to it, I guess, as well. So
there is.
Anyways, I won't take up any more of your time. Until next time, jazakallah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.